A few years ago, my friends and I decided to go on a summer trip to Baveno in Italy. We rented an Airbnb, a beautiful old villa. It was called Villa Anna. We never knew why, because the hosts didn't speak English. During the evening, we were all having a drink in the living room, and I felt something grab my hair, strongly and quickly. I turned to my closest friend. I was about to ask her to stop, but I saw in her face that it wasn't her. If it was a game, she wouldn't have reacted that way. It's getting late, and we decide to go to sleep. I'm sleeping on the couch near the front door, and my other friends were in a room. I had a lot of trouble falling asleep, and I didn't feel comfortable at all. Suddenly, around 3 o'clock in the morning, we heard the doorbell ring. Just once, but it was very long and very loud. I was scared. I told my friend that there's no way we should open the door. I mean, it's creepy to ring people's doors this late. I hid behind the window to observe, and there was no one. The automatic light didn't switch on either. We didn't even hear footsteps behind the door after the sound. Terrified, we went to see our friends in their room, and they were awake, but they didn't hear anything, and it was a loud noise. I wouldn't really know why this happened. I don't know what it was, but it definitely freaked us out. My boyfriend and I were just chilling in his living room the other day, and I was watching him on his Xbox. Out of nowhere, my heart went a little funny, kind of like getting palpitations, and I got this cold chill all over. His dog was sitting in the door frame facing the hallway and wagging its tail. A few minutes later, he made a little noise, and then the dog moved to face the sofa. He just sat there, wagging his tail. I looked at the sofa, and it was like I could see someone, but at the same time nothing was visible. My boyfriend asked me why I was so quiet, and I told him to turn around. Without even seeing his dog first, he sees the sofa, gasps, and just goes silent. I told him about how I felt the presence in the hallway, and we both noted how the dog was acting. He thinks maybe it's a relative that passed away a few years ago. It had to be somebody his dog knew, after all, because the dog was excited to see them. But ever since, I feel like someone's, or something's, watching us from the hallway. My grandfather died in his home in 2004. My grandmother went on to live another 14 years in the same house. About 6 months before she died, we had to move her to a home for full-time care. My nephew moved into the house not long after. He said he would hear someone walking. His friends heard it as well. So we kind of joked that it was Pops, looking for Nanny. Ha ha, right? So this continued for 6 months. Him hearing someone walking around the house, in and out of the master bedroom. That is, until Nanny died. The noises stopped. I guess Pops found her, and they moved on, because there haven't been any noises since. My father was recently diagnosed with a terminal illness. He was doing very well there for a long time, but in June of last year is when he started to go downhill. Ever since, I've been checking on him constantly. I live in another town, and during our last phone conversation, he started telling me about the man in the black coat that's in the house. He told me that he sees him out of the corner of his eye a lot, and that the dog constantly stares at the back of the living room, as if something is there. Last Christmas, we were taking pictures in the den, and while my sister had her phone on, ready for pictures, a huge orb flew right in front of her screen. After going to visit him a few days ago, I've personally seen this man out of the corner of my eye as well, in my dad's bedroom. I'm afraid of who or what it could be. I don't know if this is an evil spirit waiting for my dad to get weak enough to finish him off, or someone to guide him to the other side. A few months before my grandfather passed away about 20 years ago, he saw the same thing. I've heard that there are some ghosts that haunt bloodlines, but if so, then who was this person when they were alive? If they even walked the earth as a human at all? I'm getting really scared about the whole thing, and I'm afraid that one day the man in the black coat might come for me. This is a short story, but it's the truth. When I was really young, maybe around 6 or 7 years old, I was terrified to sleep by myself. Nightmares used to be a normal occurrence when I was growing up, and not just basic ones, almost lucid, as well as the non-stop feeling of being watched. One night in particular, I was woken up by one of these and I was crying. I slowly walked down the stairs as I was roomed on the second floor, and I went into my mom's bedroom as I had done many times before. I laid beside her, looking out the door at the open stairway. I had looked away for a split second, and when I looked back, there it was. I'm not sure what exactly the being was, but it looked so similar to a gray alien, except it was almost white. It was just standing there in the light of the hallway, watching me with immensely dark eyes, like it had been watching me all night. I can't remember anything else, other than the entity was just watching from the stairs into the dark bedroom. I haven't had any other experiences like this, but on some nights I start getting that feeling again of being watched, or like something is waiting for me to fall asleep. I'm not sure if this is exactly scary, but it's certainly something that I haven't been able to explain. I was about 4 or 5 years old and living in the Philippines, and I had this eccentric neighbor who was a sweet middle-aged woman that lived on the floor above us. The memories I have of her include the fact that she gave me a dog who immediately died the next day, and that when I got a pet bird, her cat ate it the next day as well. But other than that, she was a pretty nice lady who would always feed me and give me toys. One day my mom went to work, and so this neighbor had to watch me for the afternoon. I remember she bent down to pick something up, and I noticed 2 little red horns buried under her dark black hair. The one on her, I want to say left side, was broken in half, and the other was sharpened to a point. My little child self thought they were fake, and so I placed my hand on the point, trying to take them off so I could observe them. She swatted my hand away and immediately bolted straight up and told me never to touch them and to never do that again. The rest of the night pretty much went on without issue. The story is pretty anticlimactic, but I've been trying to make sense of this for 16 years. I tried to look up genetic issues, birth defects. Nothing really came up that was remotely similar to what I saw. You would think, or at least I would, that if it was some sort of birth defect, she just would have explained it. And I don't know why she would swat my hand away like that, because she had never been violent before. I wish I could meet her again or find some way to get into contact with her, but the complex we lived in has since been demolished, and I haven't been back in my home country since I was 5. This happened a couple of years ago, so I'm used to having nightmares ever since I was a little kid, and I don't know if this means anything, but anyway, I went to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning. As usual, I had a nightmare, but this one was different. It wasn't scary, it was uncomfortable. I could only see random colors, mostly green and purple, and a weird sound. While I was having this weird nightmare, somehow I felt something push my legs out of bed. I was freaked out, but I didn't want to show that to whatever was pushing me. So in the middle of those purple and dark green colors, I started to see a curved, fat shape. It looked something like a swamp monster, and it was smiling at me. I think he noticed, or it noticed, that I wasn't 100% asleep. And this thing gave me a last hard push and went away. When I woke up, I was halfway out of my bed, with my legs out, and my toes, where I think his hands had been, were really hot. I never shared this with any of my friends, of course, because I didn't want them to think I was crazy. But I don't really know how to explain this. I was 8 or 9 years old at the time this happened. My mother had to move my sister, herself, and I to a shelter due to her abusive ex-boyfriend. I think my mother asked me to go get the laundry basket upstairs. Now I have to remember that I was the only male that was old enough to speak because this was a women's shelter only, and small children. I went upstairs and no one was up there except for me. But as soon as I got upstairs, I had this weird sensation that I was being watched. I approached my mother's and her roommate's bedroom to retrieve the basket. As I walked back to approach the staircase, I felt a breeze, which was odd, since the window in there could not open. I shivered in fear, knowing something strange was about to happen, and this wasn't the first time I had felt an eerie presence. At this time, I hadn't seen any strange phenomenon in quite some time. Suddenly, a little boy that sounded on the verge of tears called out, "Mommy! Daddy! Help me! Anyone! Please, anyone save me!" I dropped the basket, sprinting to the window to see if anybody was down there. I was so scared to see no one outside that I lost all control and started to scream until I raced downstairs. I asked around to see if anybody had heard such a thing, but no one has heard the little boy crying outside. I have seen things, but I had never heard a voice or a spirit or illusion or whatever you want to call it like that. I work with this guy from Mexico, and he used to tell me these crazy stories about Mexico. The one that scares me the most is the one about the white dress witch. While in Mexico, he said every year, once a year, around 3 o'clock in the morning, he would wake up, and in the corner of his room, he would see a lady dressed in white. He would be so terrified that he could do nothing except stare at her and cry. So after he told me that, I said, "Yeah, right." Then he told me that he had seen her at the back of our chemical plant on graveyard shifts at 3 o'clock in the morning. Again, I shook it off and assumed he was just messing with me. Then one day, I had to go to the back and mess with some of the dryers. I was walking back and saw a white sheet floating in the wind. So I stopped and stared, and then I realized that what I was looking at was a lady in a white dress with white hair. I don't think I've ever ran so fast in my entire life. Of course, when I got back to the shift, I told them what I had seen, and nobody believed me, except my friend from Mexico. Ever since then, I've been seeing more and more weird and unusual things in the plant, and now they're starting to happen in my home. To set the scene, we watched a Paranormal Files video last night where they went looking for La Llorona. In the warning section of the video, it stated that those researching La Llorona could possibly invite her into their lives, as could watching this video. We thought it was kind of a ploy. Later in the night, my girlfriend went into our room and laid down, while I was still streaming and playing, and she took our dog with her. Now, our dog does not bark. The only time she does bark is if there's a noise outside that's loud enough for all of us to hear, and she especially doesn't bark or get defensive when I am in the house. So they're both laying there, and around 1 o'clock in the morning, our dog starts going nuts. Hair raised, barking like I've never heard her bark, and inching toward the end of the bed like she's trying to jump down but won't. Keep in mind that if she does rarely start barking, she will usually run to a specific spot and pace back and forth while barking until I tell her it's okay to stop. She would not get off the bed or stop barking until I came in and calmed her down. Everything went back to somewhat normal and I laid down. Nothing weird happened during the night, but we wake up and there's a message on my girlfriend's phone from Alexa, and it states, "It knows where you live." I believe in ghosts and paranormal, but not to the point where I connect every strange occurrence to the supernatural right off the bat. But this one kind of has me thinking. Could it be that we invited something in? Or is it just a weird glitch in Alexa that caused the message to pop up on her phone, but not the activity page? I don't know if anybody else has gotten a weird message like this, but it's freaky. When I was younger, my family had decided to rent a new house. The first nights were pretty normal and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. After a couple of days or so, I went to bed later in the night after we all finally got our beds in. I shared a bed with my twin, and he's a pretty deep sleeper. I was halfway asleep when I looked toward our door, and that's when I saw the figure of what appeared to be our dad, standing and staring at me. I thought this was kind of odd. I felt my brother on the other side of the bed from me, which confirmed that it wasn't him. I remember quietly asking, "Dad?" But when I blinked in a second, he was gone. What's harder to explain is that the figure had a glowing presence, and it was wearing a shirt that my dad used to love but that he had lost before we moved to that house. I'm not really sure what I saw. My dad was still alive. I don't know if it was a ghost, a doppelganger, or something else. I was around 11 or 12 when this happened. I had a German Shepherd that I would often take for walks just to get out of the house. I was homeschooled and I was also taking care of my sick mother, so it was nice just to go out and go for a walk. We would go twice a day, once in the morning and once at night. Well, on this night walk in particular, I remember the moon being bright, and I remember enjoying the music that I would listen to on our walk. We would walk 1 or 2 miles to a certain checkpoint and then turn back home. I'm partially deaf, so when I listen to music it's pretty loud so I can hear it. I do keep a close eye on my surroundings. We lived in kind of a country area, so cars would only come through at night once in a while. My dog was fearless and capable of keeping me safe, as 2 dogs had gotten out and she took them both down to protect me without an injury. So safety wasn't too much of a concern for me. Well, in this night, when we turned back, we were almost home when all of a sudden I heard horse hooves behind me, like they were gaining speed fast. They had to have been loud if I could hear them. I whipped around, only to notice these huge black horses, bigger than any regular horse I'd ever seen, and a black carriage a couple of feet away. They were coming in fast. I looked at my dog thinking I was crazy, but I saw that she was panicked and was unsure of which way we should run. All I could think is, it's too late, and I panicked and braced myself for the impending hit. I closed my eyes, and nothing happened. I opened them, and it was all gone, like nothing was ever there. Still to this day as an adult, I have no idea what happened, what it was, or if I'm just crazy. But if I am, then so is my dog. I've always thought maybe it was ghosts from old settlers, but I still have no idea. I dream of odd things all the time, but this was particularly odd. The other day I was finally sleepy and went to bed at around midnight, as usual. I had the typical dreams that I'm familiar with, and that went on for a while. They weren't unpleasant dreams at all, just strange. Then all of a sudden I found myself having a view of my room, with me asleep on my bed. It was like I was floating at the corner of the room, overlooking everything. I saw myself sleeping, and there was a dark figure by the foot of my bed on the right side, like it was just staring at me while I was asleep. It's identifiable, even in the darkness of my room, if that makes sense. I couldn't make out if it was human or what. Seeing such a thing didn't make me panic, but it did make me curious. Then all of a sudden it was like I got pulled by force through an opening, and then I opened my eyes and I was in bed. I could feel my whole body ache, like I'd been in one very rigid position for a few hours. I looked at the clock and it was exactly 3 a.m. I looked around the room and nothing was there. I don't really know how to explain what I saw. This story happened to my grandmother while she was a professional nurse on night duty at a hospital for terminally ill patients, as well as for extremely disabled patients. It wasn't unusual for cats to sometimes get into the hospital. The nurses would just catch them and take them outside. One night, the nurses called my grandmother and said that there was a black cat in the medicine room and that they couldn't get close enough to it to get it out. My grandmother took sheets and they went into the room. The one nurse and my grandma threw a sheet over the cat and tried to take it out that way. They struggled to get the cat out and they called some of the other staff to help. While trying to get it out, my grandmother says that the cat made the most hair-raising and scary noise she'd ever heard. She described it as a human scream. When they got to the door and opened it, and opened the sheet, the cat was just gone, as if there'd never been a cat there. A lot of weird things happened at that hospital, but that was one of her creepiest stories. I shared a bunk bed with my brother, and I was on the top bunk. One day, I woke up at some point after sunrise, but before it was time for us to get out of bed. I was near the wall that the bunk bed was up against, and I was facing it. I flipped over and opened my eyes, and when I did, I saw myself in my bed, looking right into my eyes. I was scared shitless, so I flipped back over and covered myself with the blanket before eventually falling back to sleep. I haven't seen my doppelganger since, but that was easily one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. The first time I saw something, my cousin was sleeping over. In the middle of the night, I woke up for no reason. I didn't hear a noise or anything. I just woke up. With the way my room is set up, I woke up facing my open closet door. I saw my boyfriend in there, just facing me, and it was a perfect silhouette of him. It had his curly hair, his glasses, his body type, height, everything, except it was all a shadow. I rubbed my eyes and still saw it there. I then grabbed my phone from its charger and shined its light onto him, and of course the shadowy illusion disappeared. I was ready to fall back to sleep until it reappeared right after I turned the light off. Even so, I wasn't scared. I just stared at it, as it stared at me, hoping that the more awake I became, the less I would see it. But at this point, I was fully awake and aware now, and it was still there, standing in my closet. I shook my cousin awake and I told her what I saw, but of course the shadow disappeared moments before I could expose it. The second time something weird happened, I was asleep with my boyfriend over Skype. We do this just because we're clingy, and we mute ourselves to make sure the other person can sleep without disturbances. I was turned onto my side, and all of a sudden I felt paralyzed. I was clenching my fists, trying to regain control of my body, and somehow was able to open my eyes, and then I saw it again. It wasn't in my closet this time. It was standing next to me. It had to have been a hallucination or something, because I heard it whispering to me, asking me to wake up and come with him. I managed to shake myself back into control and sit up, rubbing my eyes. Thankfully it was gone. I was convinced that my boyfriend was messing with me and had somehow spoken to me. I unmuted myself on Skype to interrogate him and to ask him why he would want to wake me up. But he told me that he had been muted the entire time, trying to sleep. My dad told me that when he had an apartment in San Diego with my mother, they both woke up one night at the exact same time. There was a really tall man at the foot of their bed. He was wearing a trench coat and a wide brim hat. The figure's face was just darkness, and the outfit was all black. The figure turned and went out of the room and down the hall. Only the figure had no gait. It was as though he floated or slid out of the room. My dad jumped up out of bed as soon as the figure left, but it was gone. He checked everything. The doors, the windows, everything was locked. They packed up and left that apartment that morning. This happened almost 4 years ago. I went to a rock quarry at night to watch fireworks with my ex. We stood on top of a rock pile for a few minutes, looking up into the sky, admiring the fireworks, when we heard something running on the dirt road below us. Instinctively, we got quiet and crouched down, thinking maybe it was a deer or a bear. What we saw was running on 2 feet, was stick thin, and about 7 to 8 feet tall. It ran about 100 yards into the woods and was gone within seconds. I remember it vividly, and while I've recently heard about things called stick people, I don't know if that's what this was. I still don't have any explanation. So about a week after my great-grandmother passed away, I was over visiting with my grandparents, and we were all sitting around, talking as usual, nothing out of the ordinary. Suddenly their landline phone rings, and the number on the caller ID shows no name, and the phone number was all zeros. My granddad does this joke he does where he gets a weird call from someone he doesn't recognize, and he'll say, "I don't know anyone named 0000000," and let the answering machine get it. So a minute later it shows that the ominous number left a message on the answering machine, and we play it. As the message plays, there's about 10 seconds of static noise, like someone has a bad connection, and then it stops, and we hear a woman's voice say, "I love you." And we all immediately turned and looked at each other and didn't say a word. A few more seconds of static followed, and the message ended. We all recognized the voice as belonging to my great-grandmother. What adds to my belief that it was her is that she had this weird thing where she would never say the words "I love you" to anyone. She was a sweet lady, but something about those words she would just never say, even if you said them to her. So I believe she regretted that and needed to pass the message along to my granddad. Nothing else happened since, but I will always remember that experience. My husband and I usually sleep really well. not normally waking up a lot, and it only takes about an hour for me to fall asleep. No nightmares or anything like that. However, last night in his sleep, my husband turned to me and started loudly groaning. It sounded almost like The Grudge, and I thought he was messing with me. I stopped him and said, "Hey, what the fuck are you doing?" I was almost laughing because he had woken me up with this weird noise right in my ear. He immediately said, "What are you talking about?" and apparently had no idea that he was making this loud-ass demonic noise, and I woke him up by asking him what he was doing. It kind of weirded me out, but I didn't think much of it because I was half asleep. I felt my phone underneath me, and he normally puts his phone on a wireless charger at night, so it was a little odd that it was his phone on the bed. I unlocked the phone to see what time it was and make sure that it wasn't my phone, and the time showed 3:33 a.m. That made me feel even weirder about the situation because I've heard that this is the devil's time or something like that. But since I know my husband is a skeptic, I didn't give it any more thought. We both easily went back to sleep, but it was definitely weird. He told me this morning that when he got up, his work phone showed that it was about 20 minutes after his alarm should have gone off, and he rushed to get ready. Then, after almost being ready to go, he looked again, and it was a time before his alarms were supposed to go off. Not sure if that has any significance, but it was a little odd to both of us. I really don't know what happened that night, but it was strange. This happened around early mid-July 1994. I was 6 at the time when this happened, and my memory is a tad fuzzy. My folks and I moved from Washington, D.C. to Knott's Island in North Carolina, the most redneck part of the state, due to my father being in the Navy. After some time, we moved into our new home. My dad had to go to San Francisco to study. My older brother was on a naval ship, and that left me and my mother in the new place. One night, I was in my parents' bed and I woke up having an odd feeling. At the foot of the bed, and what I could tell by how dark it was in the room, was a man. He placed his index finger to his lips, indicating that I should be quiet. He mouthed that he was protecting and keeping an eye on my mother and I while my father was away, and then he vanished. My mother woke up not long after, asking why I was up. I explained what happened to her. She searched the entire house and didn't find the mysterious man.